I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award-winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Hello and welcome to Just Justice. My name is Jessica Henry and I'll be your host. On Just Justice, we focus on second chances, what it means to come home after prison, what it takes to rebuild a life, and what systems either help or stand in the way. But today's conversation takes that idea in a direction that most of us have probably never even thought about before. My guest today is Charles Rosen, the founder of Ironbound Farm and Ironbound Hard Cider in New Jersey. Charles started this company with a pretty ambitious idea to build a regenerative farm and a profitable business that also created meaningful work opportunities for people who are chronically underemployed, including many who have come home from prison. Before launching Ironbound, Charles had a long career in law, advertising, and media. But over time, he became interested in how broken economic systems, environmental decline, and mass incarceration are all connected. So he set out to do something different, to build a company that proves business can actually be part of repairing those systems. Today, we're going to talk about how farming, work, and second chances intersect, and we'll also look at some of the challenges that come from trying to provide second chances to people who need them. Charles Rosen, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here, Jessica. Even as you were going through the introduction, I was thinking like, oh, we have to make sure we talk about this and then that. So hopefully I'll be your first 4-part guest, but we'll see if we have much of it we can get.
You've had such an interesting path into this work. You started out in law and media. Eventually, you wound up creating a regenerative farm and a cider company. What's the turning point that led you in this direction of all directions?
Leaving my work, around federal politics during the Obama administration and my race for Congress, I decided that I wanted to go to Newark, New Jersey. And for your listeners who aren't local, Newark is a large manufacturing city. It's our largest city in New Jersey. And although I didn't know what we wanted to be as a business, I went in with a mission to say that, I wanted to prove that a for-profit business could care about environmental stewardship, human repair, community building, but do it as a business, right? Break us out of this political us versus them discourse and go in and say like, hey, can we do something, here in Newark that captures that diversity of our state and is still something that's valued by the marketplace. So, like every typical liberal elite social justice warrior, I took all my money and went to Newark to help Black people, like as if I was, Jesus or something. It sort of makes me laugh now when I think back to it, when I think about how humbling my work is as a farmer and what it is to truly build community with people, not for people. I realize the arrogance with which I started this business was certainly something to behold. Anyway, that's I guess a whole other story about myself. But so when we got to Newark, and I had this vision of primarily working with returning citizens, I thought the goal would be like, okay, I'm going to create all these living wage jobs. We're going to provide health insurance, and we're going to create products that, capture what New Jersey is for the rest of the marketplace. And we'll have all of this money coming in through the business to help fund our innovations on workforce development and other things. Well, I came to learn a number of things. One, I came to learn that creating jobs, and I'm sure a lot of your guests talk about, second chance employment and things. So I learned that the job piece of this was really only the very beginning. That when you're working with men and women who have maybe suffered from chronic poverty for generations, when you're talking about, and in this case, primarily the men that I work with, thinking that we have a prison system designed to break these men and women down to nothing. break them down spiritually, break them down emotionally, break them down financially, limit what they can do when they come out, limit where they can live when they come out. All of that is quite honestly by design. And it's heartbreaking, and it's really unimaginable for me to think that we have a system that is designed to sort of force to keep these men and women as third class citizens.
Now, Charles, one of the things I don't want to cut you off here, but one of
Yeah.
the things I find so interesting is, so you have this idea that you're going to leave politics, you're going to leave your law career, all of the things, and you're going to go into Newark and you're going to see where you can contribute. And you decided to focus on returning citizens, folks who are coming home from prison. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering why.
Well, I think, well, two things. One, if I was truly going to want to create a business, um, that was working with the people in Newark, not for the people of Newark, right? Which is a lot of how we develop cities like Newark, right? A lot of us come in, we take advantage of tax credits for real estate development, we build these businesses, we use taxpayer money to develop businesses, and then we kind of get the heck out of town at 5 o'clock at night, right? It's a I live in a town that's really a suburb of Newark, Montclair, which has a lot of affluent people, a lot of whom, spend their days in Newark making a lot of money, but then certainly not staying there, in the evening. So um, anyway, I looked at reentry, and I looked at um, returning citizens or formerly incarcerated people in Newark, because in Newark right now, less than 8% of the jobs in Newark are held by Newark residents. Um, it's something like 1 in 2.5 or something. Black men who live in Newark have been incarcerated at some point in their life. It's such a chronic piece of the community and the society and the ecosystem of Newark that if we weren't going to face that head on, everything else just seemed like, virtue signaling and social justice warring, efforts. So I said, well, if I'm going to do this with the people of Newark, these are the people that we really have to think about, because in my work as a lawyer and in my work in politics, had seen that this system was really designed to keep them, down.
Yeah, and I mean one of the issues or one of the things I'm sure that you have been sort of dealing with in focusing on reentry and hiring folks is and I think you said this earlier, it's not just providing employment, right? There are so many collateral consequences to having a criminal record. In other words, there are barriers to housing, there are barriers to sort of governmental supports that other people might be eligible for, but that they are not. And so there's these systems in place that magnify the effect of a criminal record. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll come back to it's interesting in our business, but like just in New Jersey alone, there are limitations on where you can work around open alcohol, right? They can't be ticket takers at the Prudential Center because there's beer sort. I was like, well, we are an alcohol company, but it's interesting, not just jumping too far ahead, but I'll get to why we do what we do now. But we are an alcohol company. We make a hard cider called Ironbound Hard Cider, and that's
Which
because we
is
came.
delicious, by the way. Anyone who's
It
looking for a hard cider, it's good
is.
stuff.
And it's funny, we didn't know about, so cider was the very first industry in Newark. It's the earliest industry in Newark. From the 1600s to the early 1800s, Americans didn't drink the beer. I'm sorry, they didn't drink the water. They drank cider. And it's interesting, Newark cider was like the most beloved cider in the world. The King of England wrote about it in 1684. George Washington only drank Newark cider. And it was funny, when we came to learn about cider, um, we decided that we wanted to bring back Newark cider, but to be a cidery in New Jersey at the time, we had to be a winery. And to be a winery, we needed to be producing at our site of fruit cultivation at a scale that we couldn't do in Newark. I had no intention of leaving Newark, but that's just simply sort of what we had to do. So we bought a farm about an hour west of New Jersey. And to make a very long and complicated short, basically me and 20 gang members from Newark, parked ourselves in Western Jersey, a very, very conservative part of the state where it's me, some liberal Jew from Montclair and 20 gang members showing up into, what is now very much Trump territory. It was like, what just got to Hunterdon County, right? Like, it was a lot. But it was interesting because it was only in that space did we well, few things about that. So first of all, I was talking about this idea that the job was only the beginning. What we realized being out of the city was that dealing with issues, we ended up spending almost 2 years with Columbia University's Earth Institute building a curriculum on things like conflict resolution, identity value, emotional intelligence, fiscal literacy. Our farm managers were all trained in horticultural therapy because we're using healing the land as part of the healing process, right? Things that I've had to absorb as a business, just so these men and women can get through the day. Talking about getting through the day, I mean, I can't have three of my guys drive from Newark to the farm less than an hour west of where they live because we call it the third man rule. You can't have three black guys in a car in Western Jersey because they're stopped by the state troopers 100% of the time, right? So I had to buy every one of my guys their own cars just to get to work, right?
Is it really
Um,
true? Like, are you speaking in hyperbole, or are you finding that when there were three people of color in the same car going to your farm, they were stopped in Hunterdon County?
I have one story, but I mean, a lot. I mean, one I can share with you. We had two of our crew chiefs were driving out a new employee, and the new employee actually had come through the U.S. Attorney's reentry program and or the reentry court, and it ends up that and Senator Booker wanted me to hire this guy, and former Governor McGreevey wanted me to hire this guy, and blah 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 blah. So, my two longstanding employees were driving him out, and when they were stopped, and their ID, their backgrounds were checked, and it ends up that my guys happen to be Bloods. The new guy was a Crip.
Oh gosh.
What that looked like, and only because another employee saw them on the highway that I was called. And when I got back, the amount of cop cars there with these guys face down in the ground because, like, you know, thank God I'm an attorney. Thank God I got there. But that's just one example of a daily routine, right? It's jumping around a little, but again, I was mentioning that to be a cidery, we had to be a winery. To be a winery, I mean, our whole business and why we're out there is the cider company. But my guys aren't really allowed to work for that company, and they're not allowed in that building. It's where we do most of our work. So I had to create two companies just so they could work there. My agricultural business, my farm, is one company. My cider company is another company. And even though they're connected and integrated, they have to be separate companies because none of my guys can work for the cider company, for the winery. Can't work there.
Wow,
Can't be in
that's
that building.
fascinating because they're not allowed to work with alcohol. And did you also find, Charles, I'm just curious about this, because you were employing multiple people with criminal records, many of whom were on parole or under some kind of supervision, did you have difficulty with the fact that they were going to be working together?
Well, I mean, I don't even know where to start with parole. So, A, working together, absolutely. B, if there were any that had records tied to sexual assault, especially statutory, that had a whole bunch of other restrictions, what they could do. Could they be open to the public? I mean, we're a public destination. We're a winery that has a tasting room and a restaurant and a farm to visit, and we only cook on open flame, and all of our chefs are also farmers, and it's a whole integrated system. Well, a lot of my guys aren't allowed to be working on days that we're open to the public, and if they are, they have to be away from that stuff. But not only that, parole officers randomly choosing days that somebody who'd maybe been out for 18 years, who didn't have any violations, decided that they needed to wait at home to pee in a cup, and they didn't show up. If there was any other employer but me, most of my guys would have all lost their jobs by now. I mean, we just right now, and it's hard because we're talking about reentry as if this is, well and good once we once they're out and they have a job. But our property manager, who has been on parole for 5 years, in that 5 years, he has never, out of 46 visits with his PO, not one violation, not one incident, not one traffic ticket. He is sober. He is the primary caretaker for his elderly grandparents, his daughters, and his wife who has autoimmune disorder. He was just picked up on what I would consider at best a technical parole violation that I don't even think was a violation. Spent 6 weeks in Essex County Correction, even though he lives in Warren County, because parole has a contract with Essex County, one of the most heinous facilities in the state, where they're 23-1. He had not, there had been no, hearing, anything. 6 weeks in a cell where I had put money on his commissary account. But he had no sweatshirt. It's been 11 degrees on some of those days in this thing. He has not been able to get a sweatshirt at commissary in 6 weeks because because they were quote unquote sold out, as if it's some new fashion design or something. So you're in a cell with no blanket, in a t-shirt. It's 11 degrees out, so maybe your cell's 6 degrees. When correction officers just don't show up for work on days that are snowing, so then when the sewage backs up and you're locked in your cell, you're now standing, in your slippers, in feces, in sewage, with no blanket, no sweatshirt. You may or may not get your meal, which, by the way, is the same meal every single lunch and dinner. It's a piece of chicken leg and rice in a plastic bag that's been microwaved, passed through the cell door. When you're a farmer and you understand the value of nutrient-rich food, you understand growing your food matters. You understand that clean water matters, and they're drinking water out of a tap through an old bag that was holding a packet of fish from commissary or something, and eating shit. And the lights are on 24/7 and the noise is unbearable, and you're locked in a cell and nobody's there to let you out. So now there's sewage everywhere. So you're in the noise of like a zoo rattling cages, and you haven't even been found, that there was a violation. But on top of that, he literally just last week had a parole hearing. And by the way, parole hearings are very interesting. You're not in front of the parole board. There's just a parole officer, a hearing officer. She may or may not be an attorney. She may be whatever. She's basically a stenographer. The CO makes their report as if they're the prosecutor. There's an attorney there. And then there's a summary report, and that report is put in front of the parole board. And they just make a determination. Big stack of these things, and they make a determination. So he was just given a year for a non-violation. And by the way, he had a letter of support from Governor McGreevy, letters of support from me, my wife, my children, and 10 coworkers. He had on the record the parole, his PO, saying that there has been no violations. He doesn't drink. He, is a pastor in his church, blah, 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 blah. One of the most important employees in my company. He is running the whole farm property piece. A year means most likely his daughters will be now homeless. His grandparents have no caretaker. They're in their 80s and 90s. I lose my property manager, so my business is a really thing. I don't even know what that year is doing for anyone. There was a psych eval to show that he's not a threat to himself or anybody around him. And you have a letter and not even, to get a letter for, and by the way, who on the inside has a me on the outside that's funding their commissary, funding their lawyers, getting letters from governors, blah, 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 sending books, doing this, doing that. Most of these men don't even have that. So that doesn't even get us close to talking about what it is to move to federal prison and then you're sent to a state so far away. Visitation is almost impossible for most of these people. Getting a phone. Once you're at a certain facility, let's say like Bayside or Northern, maybe even Rahway, the gangs sort of control the phones because there's limited phones. So if you're not part of that gang, you ain't getting a phone. So I'm guessing I'm not going to hear so much from this guy for at least the next 9 months, just because he's not going to have access to a phone.
Charles, and while this particular story is obviously devastating to your business, devastating to him and his family, and will have significant ripple effects in his immediate community and beyond, it's also really telling because here you are. You have a company that you designed specifically to help lift up people with records and provide people with opportunities for well-paid jobs that where they can use the skills they have and develop new ones. And what you're talking about here is a structure or a system that is designed to trip people up and to pull them out of those successful opportunities, right? Like, here's this person, he was really thriving, and then parole swoops in, and now he's not even there.
Right. And by the way, to and you sort of alluded to this, but service to no one. I mean, we, the taxpayers, are paying now for this, right? My business is hurt, his family is hurt, his community is hurt. We as the taxpayers aren't getting anything. It is in service of no one. It is solely punitive and cruel and intentional, right? The mental health crisis for these men and women coming out is unimaginable. The stories I hear are unimaginable. And what's interesting about that, Jess, in our work, so jumping back for a second to how we farm and what we do on the farm, and I think it's important because it really speaks to the kind of work that you and I are engaged in.
Yeah, yeah.
So in in regenerative agriculture, which is what we practice, we mostly think about the life in the soil. We're mostly thinking about building a system of diverse organisms that work together, right? And interestingly, when you look at those microscopic organisms, as each organism in that system gets stronger, the whole system gets stronger, right? And to me, that's nature giving us a model for what community building should look like, right? Where if you think about it from a human perspective, it shouldn't matter your color or your politics or your background. How do you create a system where our well-being comes through our connectedness to each other, right? Not at each other's expense. And yet, as I was saying earlier, we live in a society that says the opposite, right? It's designed to separate us. It's designed to say that that guy's my enemy, right? Oh, a black ex-con, that's my enemy. He did this. He's here to rape and kill our people. Those immigrants have to be sent home to Mexico. Those women are destroying the country, blah, 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 blah. It's everyone else's fault but mine, right? And the power of something, let's say, like that red hat that, a MAGA hat might say, is it's a very powerful symbol about the individual. It's saying it is not my fault that I'm poor. It's the other guy's fault. And if I can get them out of the way, I'm good, right? That's a very, very powerful thing, as most people are struggling right now.
And
So,
Charles, when you use the word regenerative, it's an interesting thing because you're
oh,
talking, when you think about
yes,
regeneration from farming, right, that's a very
yes.
specific
Uh,
connotation, which maybe you could share with us a little bit in
well,
more
and
detail.
that's, go ahead. Sorry, ask your question. I'm excited because it made me think.
So, you talk about regeneration in the context of agriculture, but you've applied regeneration in a very specific, interesting, important, unique
That's right.
way. And I want
Well,
to make sure we explore that because that really is a potential model for a pathway forward if
ah,
the systems could get out of our way, right? So
ah,
tell us what you mean.
Yay, yay. Thank you for reining me in, because I'll go off into any direction here. But really interesting, what I've learned, and when I said I'm doing more as a farmer than ever before, is that what I've learned is that transformation takes time. Whether you're talking about transformation of the
Yes,
soil
yes,
or
yes, yes.
our own bodies, our relationships,
Mhm.
right? Transformation takes time, but we do
Yes.
not value time in this country. Again, what we value, when you think about it from an economic perspective, we value quarterly returns for shareholders and instant gratification as consumers, right? Um, when we shifted from being a manufacturing based economy up until 1980 to a professional services based economy, and we started outsourcing our jobs to overseas and to our prisons, um, companies stopped having a responsibility to their own employees, to the communities in which they resided, even to their own customers. It was, how do we make as much money for shareholders? So we don't value time. And when you're talking about the men and women that we work with, when you're coming out of a state of chronic poverty, when you're coming out of crises, only time can allow that repair. Time with each other, time on the land, time healing the land. And it's interesting, our work has expanded to include not just returning citizens formerly incarcerated men and women, but also veterans and refugees and people with disabilities. But it's because what I came to realize is even men and women in those days coming back from tours of duty from Afghanistan and Iraq were suffering from all of the same crises that somebody coming out of Rahway State Prison was, right? The only difference was we were just saluting them and saying, hey, thanks for your service. We weren't thanking them for shit, right?
Right.
Because they
And
had this. Oh, go ahead.
no, I mean, what you're focusing on, what you're talking about is trauma, right? And what
Trauma.
people, when you think about the cycles of trauma, so many of the people who are incarcerated today are people who themselves were victims of something or
Mm,
experienced something that was traumatic when they were younger, right? I mean, this is how trauma breeds trauma. And so when you're
yes.
saying there's a commonality between folks returning from prison itself is a traumatic experience. You're also, and you're referring to people, for instance, who served in our wars. That's also trauma, right? There's a unifying idea here that trauma takes time to heal, and
Yes.
that
And by
without
the way,
healing, it can
that's
cause a
right.
lot of issues. Yeah.
And by the way, maybe my real, and this is, I didn't know this would turn into a therapy session for me. So thank you. It's helpful. But when you think about maybe where my real disdain for the system comes in and why I'm so angry is that when that trauma is imposed on these people by us, right? If you have a system that says, fine, you're poor, you can go to a war in Iran, you're poor, you can go to jail, right? And then we make that experience there, it is not regenerative, it is not restorative, it is not healing. There is nothing about a day in jail that does anything other than build on that trauma. This gentleman that I was telling you about that now has got another year, I do not know how he survives that year, let alone what it's going to be to come out. Where now what we have done, a lifetime of his initial conviction, living with him forever, and online, where his children go to school and these stories are there. So the trauma that his daughters has, it is a cycle that is perpetuating people to stay in a state of crises. Recently, I helped establish a farm at the Princeton Theological Seminary, which is great, called the Farminary. So these are men and women who are getting their PhDs in theology, and they're telling us that they had never really felt God until they had touched the soil, right? That were part of nature and the oneness of the universe, like really big stuff. Anyway, I was invited to the 10th anniversary of the Farminary a few months ago, and it was one of the most joyous, most connected, most loving things I've been to. And I was driving home from Princeton back to Montclair, like I felt like I was high, right? Like I was just the endorphins just coursing through my veins. I was just so joyous. I was just like elated. And anyway, so I called my friend who runs the Farminary the next morning to thank him for allowing me to be part of this thing. And so I was telling Nate how I'm feeling in my own world, even in my own synagogue, and so alone, so disconnected from community, and really judging and whatever, and blah blah blah, and how joyous I was here. And he said, Charles, he said, I think that's because our job together is to create these spaces of loving kindness that allow that joy to emerge, because it is in the joy that people will find the strength to face the things that they're unable to face right now. And he said, my recommendation was maybe treat your friends, stop judging your friends so much, treat them with a little more grace. And if you can welcome them into your work, and see that there are benefits to being in a community around nutrient rich food and working with the most marginalized members of the community and being in community with one another, they'll find that joy. And in that joy, they'll be able to step out of their comfort zone. Because right now, it's very scary for all of us to come out of our comfort zone. So my friends that are still, I don't know, getting their groceries delivered from Whole Foods through Instacart, it's because they can't, they're really not able to look beyond that, right? And so it's been a very different sense for me to think about, okay, how do we build community together? How do we create these spaces that allow that healing from the trauma that you're talking about? And how do we do it as an usness, not a me-ness, right? And if it's just about me and my well-being and my family, I'm going to have little capacity to open my heart to those other people.
Going back to this notion of regeneration for just a minute, I'm sort of curious. You've talked about regeneration of the land. You've talked about the benefits to community that can come from it. But I'm also wondering because This whole project started with a vision of justice, of what justice could look like. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could share with us what a vision for a regenerative justice system could look like.
Mm,
Is that a thing that could even
yeah.
exist?
Well, thank you for bringing me back to that. I would say first, this notion of time is critical. Look, you and I have seen a lot of reentry programs at the federal level, the state level, not for profits. None of them, zero, provide the time, right? Oh, I took a class, I did this, I got a job, this guy got posted there, blah, 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 blah. None of it.
Well,
Because
Charles,
it's
when you
again,
say that, what do you mean? Like when you say,
what I mean is when you look at any reentry program that is dependent on grant money, federal, state, or not-for-profit money or foundation money, you the executive directors of those programs have to present numbers of success. Oh, X amount of people went through my program in X amount of months, and they X amount of them got positions, and our rate of recidivism is blank, blah blah blah. Give us more money, please. Um, None of those people are ready for what we do. I have taken people out of almost every single state, federal, not-for-profit program available to us in New Jersey. I won't go through the names of all of them, but zero people, zero that have come out of those programs are ready to work for me. And I have personally funded the repair work that needs to come after they come out of those programs, right? So I don't have that money left anymore. My wife and I chose that, oh, if we're going to have a head of workforce development, if we're going to have weekly group sessions, if we're going to have one-on-one sessions, if we're going to build a curriculum around like things like I said, like emotional repair and conflict resolution, if we're going to treat farming the way we do, where we value work of allowing soil to regenerate. I mean, we have pigs on our farm because we don't till the soil, so the pigs are rooting all the land. Well, in doing that work, our pork is higher in omega fatty acids and salmon. Our 3,000 chickens and turkeys and ducks do all our our pest management, so we don't use pesticides in our trees. Our goats so it's all part of an ecosystem that's connected. I'm paying for all of that because nobody pays what it costs me to do the work that we do, support the people that we support, build the partnerships that we support, and what the market is willing to pay. There's a huge gap between that, right? Because again, we value low cost and convenience. So I've covered that gap for over 10 years. Um, Personally funded that because the programs that I'm talking about don't do that work. There is no way that this should be happening where I'm so siloed in my work without governmental support, without not-for-profit support. This should be, if we really wanted effective programs, and you've got second chance employers that want to be part of this, I think the idea of building a real coalition of private, public, and not-for-profits as a holistic model. And by the way, it's really interesting for me to realize that social justice work and our environmental repair work are also connected. You can't just say like, it's going to be about reentry and fuck what we're doing to the land so we can grow more shitty food to feed poor people in food banks, glyphosate-filled food. Or the verses saying, oh, we're a regenerative farm and we grow sustainably this, but I'm paying people slave wages and no health insurance, so they can't even afford the food they're growing. That's not okay. It's about a wholeness to the system. And where I get excited about what we're doing in building a whole kind of marketplace where we're collapsing the supply chain, getting rid of middlemen, where we're supporting and incubating businesses, like I said, for immigrant women entrepreneurs and connecting them to farmers, then being the shelf where they can actually sell those things as one system that cares about all of this interconnectedness, healing our soil, healing our water, healing each other, and building a vibrant, self-sustaining community-based model. The answer lies in that all of that being one thing. And there are incredible people that you and I have known for our years of doing this work in the work, right? But they're so siloed in their efforts. And it's not enough. But I'm telling you, if it wasn't me, 100% of my folks that have come out of reentry, except for the guy that just got a year, 100% of them would have been fired a long, long time ago. And quite honestly, for us, most of our reentry efforts have fucking failed, right? Most of my guys, or a lot of my guys, back in prison, unemployed, dead, because their own gangs didn't
So
think what we were doing.
what do you, there you are, you're providing employment with living wage and health insurance, and it sounds like social workers on staff
Yeah,
facilitating groups
yeah,
and sort of creating, like, as you called it, a holistic regenerative justice environment that involves the land and people. But
yeah.
you're saying that even that has not been successful for a lot
No,
of the folks that you've pulled through. So why is
or for me
that?
as a business, or for me as a business,
Why do you think it's not
because
working?
because the marketplace doesn't value that.
And so
The
what
marketplace.
is it for the folks who got out of prison and were hired by you? What is it you think that creates returns to prison or creates the inability to stay at your workplace or however we want to describe it?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you look at it on a macro level, so most industrial farms in our country, big, you know, farms, including corporate organic farms, all of them have contracts with private prisons, leasing them inmates at $10 a day. Okay.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Especially as we start deporting all of our immigrant workers, we need a bunch of black guys who can work at $10 a day growing our food, right? So right away, when you have I'm just talking about food system because that's the space I'm in. If again we expect food to be cheap and plentiful, regardless of the nutritional value in it, even our Title One breakfast and lunch programs, free lunch programs, the federal program is only caloric based. It's not nutrient based, right? So
And Charles, I
we
don't mean to, I'm interrupting you on purpose, actually. When you said we need a bunch of black guys farming, what you actually mean is that we need a bunch of people who are under state control, like folks in prison,
yes,
many of
yes,
whom are black and brown. I just, when we're
yes, yes.
talking, just
Yep.
to clarify that,
It's just an
we're talking
easier,
about
yeah,
a prison labor
shorthand.
population.
Right. It's an easier shorthand, I think, for me and others to get is when you're just picturing slave labor, chances are what pops in your head is a black guy. But yes, it is state controlled. So parole officers I know throughout the country who have a new mandate to pick more people up for free labor, right? And that's not just on our farms, right? It's really interesting. I don't know much about it, and I don't want to take our time, but I'm just learning about a prison program in Maine where the people incarcerated are able to get jobs like um, can do jobs from within prison on computers and phones and stuff. And the state is taking a portion of the money, but they're getting real salaries, not $1 a day, but real salaries. And then the state takes a portion of that money, but those men and women now can continue to pay their mortgages, continue to pay child support payments. It's quite interesting. But for most of our programs, it's free labor. I mean, just back to this one guy that I was talking about earlier that just got back put into state for a year because it's a parole violation and not a conviction. He doesn't get time off for work in the prison. Usually, the way it works is for certain jobs, the best jobs you can get, like kitchen jobs, you get 10 days off of every month for if you're working in the kitchen. So, let alone the dollar or two you're getting to put in your commissary account, you were getting time off your sentence. That doesn't apply when it's a parole violation. So he's in there for the year no matter what, and he doesn't get paid for the job really, he gets $1 a day. So at what point is it even worth it for him to even take one of the prison jobs, even if it's available to him? We've disincentivized him. So he's sitting there because we want it as free labor. So so yes, I think um, if you're asking about what does a holistic response look like, we shouldn't be okay as a society saying we're going to have migrant workers who are here legally ripped out and sent home, or we're going to have people under state control growing that food instead of them for free so we can get cheap food at Costco. You know, it's not okay. Um, and so I think part of it is thinking about it again holistically. where like we're very committed right now to building a whole regional food system. It's not just about my business, but it's a network of 50 farms, and like I was saying, no middlemen, and we're creating our own markets, so we have our own shelves, so we're not competing against huge brands. But that idea of a oneness to the solution, where we're thinking about human well-being, by the way, because as you noted earlier, Jessica, it's not just these men and women that are suffering from trauma right now. If people don't feel traumatized right now in this country, they're insane. Like, I don't know who is not suffering from trauma right now. So to be part of a system, a community-based business where there's an usness again to it, I think that the solution has to start there. What do we value as a society? Creating jobs, but trying to force men and women who are ill-equipped to do the jobs that we expect them to do for minimum wage is not solving anything. It's perpetuating this model. Most second chance employers I know who start all well-intended, hire somebody, but that person doesn't show up because a PO didn't let them in, or the bus route changed and they can't figure out the new bus route, or they just suck at their job because they're addicts or they're broken or whatever. They don't get 18 or 26 or 38 strikes at the, instead of 3 strikes, you're out. Ironbound's a very funny place. I think you get a lot more strikes than most people would get. But they don't get those. So the employer says, well, I did my job. I tried to hire these men and women, but they couldn't do the job. And they're right. So where is the community support for this reentry work, right? Your work is really important work. The work you do is critically important, but most of the importance of your work is what you're doing right now, which is informing the nation of what this system really looks like. And back to my very first point, if the system is doing what it is designed to do, trying to fight upstream and get one, person who is wrongfully committed off, or getting somebody a job as a, I don't know, forklift operator in an Amazon warehouse, whatever, that shit is not going to do anything. It's me and you fighting upstream against a system that's okay with perpetuating a model of, I don't know. I mean, I'm not yes, I'm Canadian, but I'm not some kind of freak socialist, but I'm like, we're living in a system where the rich are getting so unimaginably rich and the poor are getting so unimaginably poor with very little in between. If we're okay with that, I don't know why you and I do what we do. But I do think the funny part is I'm also at the same time outrageously optimistic. I'm outrageously hopeful. When I'm at the farm, I am not scared. I'm in the work. It matters. It matters that my own wife has chosen this path with me and that found meaning in writing a letter about that guy that, to the parole board. I mean, if you read my wife Lauren's letter about this guy, he's part of our family. He matters to us. And that's, I think, that example that we've showed our children. I think our children are good and decent people and have chosen lives of service because we've made these choices. So I think there's great value in it. And I think there's great benefit in it, but it has to